She was 45 years old, the oldest person in this exercise. Not young, but fit, experienced. But all the 25-year-old soldiers around her saw was age. She could feel the young soldiers' stares as she checked her equipment. The young men whispered to each other from a safe distance. "She'll quit on day one," one said. "Maybe she'll last until day two," another said with a laugh. The woman tested her knife, checked her compass, organized her fire-starting kit. Every movement was economical, professional, but nobody noticed. They only saw her age. But what they couldn't see was this. With that knife, she'd managed hundreds of survival situations. She'd used that compass in 17 different climates. And she'd built fires before these young soldiers even went to school. Because Phantom wasn't just a call sign. It was a legend. And legends don't age. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these incredible tales of skill and survival. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Her name was Master Sergeant Vera Ashford, though very few people at Fort Cascade knew that name. Most knew her simply as the older instructor, or that woman from survival training, or sometimes nothing at all because she preferred operating in the background. She'd been in the Army for 23 years. Started at 22. Worked her way through every survival school the military offered. Became certified in Arctic, desert, jungle, and mountain survival. Earned her instructor certification at 28. And for the last 17 years, she'd been teaching soldiers how to stay alive when everything else wanted them dead. But here's what made this moment particularly absurd. Vera wasn't just participating in this 7-day wilderness survival assessment. She designed it. 3 years ago, she'd written the curriculum, mapped the terrain, set the standards, and trained the evaluators. This assessment that these young soldiers were about to attempt had been her idea, her creation, built from decades of real-world experience in places most of them couldn't find on a map. But due to a recent policy change requiring all instructors to recertify regardless of experience, she had to complete her own assessment. Again, at 45, surrounded by soldiers half her age who had no idea who she was. The briefing area at Fort Cascade's training grounds buzzed with nervous energy. 32 soldiers had signed up for the assessment. Only about half would finish. The 7-day wilderness survival course was designed to break people. Limited gear. No food. No communication devices. Just you, the forest, and whatever skills you brought with you. The evaluators would observe from a distance, but wouldn't intervene unless someone's life was in genuine danger. Success meant certification. Failure meant starting over. Lieutenant Marcus Chun, 26 years old and fresh from Ranger School, stood near the equipment table with his crew. He noticed Vera checking her gear and nudged his friend, Specialist Jordan Reeves. "Is she seriously doing this?" Chun muttered. Reeves grinned. "Guess she wants to prove something." Another soldier, Private First Class Tyler Moss, couldn't resist. "Ma'am, are you sure about this? It's going to be rough out there." His tone carried that particular blend of condescension disguised as concern that older women recognize instantly. Vera looked up briefly. Her eyes were calm. Steady. The kind of steady that comes from seeing things these boys would have nightmares about. "I'll manage," she said simply, then returned to her compass check. Moss exchanged glances with his buddies. The unspoken message was clear. She won't make it past day 2. Chun felt a flicker of something. Not quite guilt, but uncomfortable awareness that maybe he shouldn't be so quick to judge. But the feeling passed. Everyone knew survival training favored youth. Strength, speed, energy. Age was a liability. Captain Elena Rodriguez, the officer overseeing the assessment, called everyone to attention. "Listen up. You've all been briefed on the parameters. 7 days. Starting point is here. Extraction point is 12 miles northwest through uncharted forest. You'll be scored on shelter construction, fire-making, water procurement, food acquisition, navigation, and overall survival strategy. Medical team will be monitoring from a distance. If you trigger your emergency beacon, you're out." Questions? Silence. Then one soldier raised his hand. "Ma'am, is there an age waiver or modified standards for?" He gestured vaguely toward Vera without looking directly at her. Rodriguez's expression hardened. "There is one standard. Period. Anyone who completes the assessment successfully gets certified. Age doesn't change the requirements. The soldier nodded, chastised. But the damage was done. Now everyone was looking at Vera, the old woman, the one who probably needed special accommodations. But wait, let's pause here for a moment. Because what these soldiers didn't know was about to become their education. Vera Ashford, call sign Phantom, had earned that name not through paperwork or politics, but through results. In 2008, she'd spent 11 days behind enemy lines in Afghanistan after her convoy was ambushed. She'd evaded capture, lived off the land, and walked 70 kilometers to friendly territory. In 2012, she'd survived a helicopter crash in Alaska during a training exercise. -15 degrees. Broken ribs. She'd kept 4 injured soldiers alive for 3 days until rescue arrived. In 2015, she'd personally trained the survival instructors who would go on to train the next generation of special forces. Her reputation in the survival community was legendary. But outside that small circle, she was invisible, the way she preferred it. The assessment began at 0600. Soldiers grabbed their minimal gear, a knife, a metal container, a tarp, basic first aid, and whatever knowledge they carried in their heads. No food, no matches, no GPS. Chun and his group pushed to the front, eager to establish dominance early. Moss and several others followed, their youth giving them confidence in their speed. Vera took her time, double-checking her gear one last time. She was among the last to enter the forest. The evaluators noted it. Some exchanged knowing looks. Slow start usually meant early failure. The first day was about establishing base camp. Find water, build shelter, start fire. The basics. Chin's group found a stream quickly and set up near it. They struggled with fire for over an hour, finally getting weak flames going using friction. Moss's group chose a clearing with good visibility but questionable wind protection. Their shelter was ambitious but structurally unstable. Across the forest, 32 soldiers worked with varying degrees of success, their youth and enthusiasm sometimes helping, sometimes leading them into inefficient mistakes. Vera moved through the forest like she was reading a familiar book. She didn't rush to the first water source she found. She walked upstream, checking for animal activity, testing the current, looking for signs of contamination. She found a spot where a spring fed into a small pool, cleaner, more reliable. Her shelter wasn't fancy. It was a debris hut, built low to the ground for warmth retention, positioned to block prevailing wind, angled to shed rain. It took her 90 minutes. Some of the younger soldiers were still working on theirs after 3 hours. Fire was where experience showed most clearly. The young soldiers tried friction methods they'd learned in training, burning calories and patience while producing smoke but little flame. Vera used a bow drill she'd crafted from materials around her camp, her movements efficient and practiced. Within 20 minutes, she had sustainable fire. She didn't celebrate. She just moved to the next task, water purification. While others were still struggling with flames, she was boiling her first container of water. Here's something crucial about survival that most people misunderstand. It's not about being the strongest or the fastest. It's about being the most efficient. About making decisions that conserve energy while maximizing results. Young soldiers often attack survival challenges like they're obstacles to overcome through force. Experienced survivors treat survival like a conversation with the environment. You listen. You adapt. You work with nature, not against it. Vera had learned this lesson in a dozen different environments over 2 decades. These young soldiers were learning it for the first time. Day 2 brought the first crisis. Private Emma Garrett, 23 years old and determined to prove herself, had chosen a campsite too close to what she thought was a game trail. It was actually a corridor used by black bears. At 0300, a bear investigated her camp, looking for food. Garrett panicked, made noise, and the bear false charged. She triggered her emergency beacon. The assessment was over for her. The rescue team extracted her, unharmed but shaken. Her friends in the assessment didn't know yet. They'd learn tonight when she didn't show up at the evaluation point. Chin's group was struggling. Their fire had gone out overnight. The friction method that barely worked on day 1 wasn't working at all on day 2. They were cold, hungry, and starting to get irritable with each other. Moss's poorly built shelter had partially collapsed during a brief rain. He'd spent the night wet and miserable. Energy levels were dropping. Morale was following. This is where the assessment truly began. Not when bodies were fresh and spirits high, but when exhaustion set in and the reality of 7 days without food started to sink into hungry bellies. Vera woke at dawn, as she always did. Her fire had been built to last, banked properly to maintain coals through the night. She rekindled it easily. She'd caught 2 fish the previous evening using a weird trap she'd constructed. Simple, effective, requiring no active effort on her part. She cooked 1 fish now, eating slowly, deliberately. Not because she was savoring it, but because proper digestion conserves energy. After breakfast, she checked her snares. Empty today, but that was fine. Survival wasn't about succeeding at everything. It was about having multiple strategies so that when one failed, others sustained you. But hold on, because this is where the story gets interesting, where the young soldier's assumptions began to crack. One of the evaluators, Sergeant First Class William Hayes, had been watching Vera's performance with growing recognition. He pulled up her file on his tablet, and his eyes widened. "Captain Rodriguez," he said quietly, showing her the screen. "Do you know who that is?" Rodriguez read the file. Read it again. Then looked up at Hayes with an expression somewhere between shock and amusement. "She's Phantom?" Hayes nodded. "The Phantom. Wrote the curriculum for this entire course. She's the most experienced survival instructor in the Army." Rodriguez watched her monitor, which showed Vera calmly tending her fire. "Why didn't she tell anyone?" Hayes shrugged. "Why would she? She's here to recertify. Same as everyone else." Day 3. 2 more soldiers quit. The hunger was becoming real now. The cold was sinking into bones. The forest that seemed like an adventure on day 1 now felt oppressive. Hostile. Chin's group had finally managed sustainable fire, but their shelter was inadequate and their energy was flagging. They tried to catch fish and failed. Tried to set snares and failed. They were surviving, barely, on wild plants and hope. Moss had improved his shelter but spent so much energy doing it that he was now too exhausted to effectively hunt or forage. Meanwhile, Vera was thriving. Not in the sense of being comfortable. Survival is never comfortable, but thriving in the sense of maintaining equilibrium. Her systems were working. Fire stayed lit. Water stayed clean. Small amounts of food kept appearing. Her shelter remained dry. She wasn't expending unnecessary energy on improvements that didn't matter. She was simply maintaining the basics at a level that kept her functional. This is what mastery looks like. Not flashy, not impressive to watch, just relentlessly competent. Day 4 brought a test that would separate the skilled from the lucky. A storm rolled in. Heavy rain, dropping temperatures, wind that turned every inadequate shelter into a misery box. This was the moment Vera had known was coming because she'd designed the assessment to include it. This was the moment that revealed who'd truly prepared and who'd gotten by on good weather. Chin's shelter, marginal in good conditions, became nearly useless in the storm. Water leaked through gaps they hadn't sealed. Wind found every weakness. His group huddled together for warmth, trying to keep the fire going, burning through their energy reserves just to stay warm enough to survive the night. 3 soldiers in other groups triggered their emergency beacons during the storm. They were done. Vera's debris hut, built low and solid, shed water like it was designed to. Because it was. She'd waterproofed it with layers of bark and vegetation that formed a natural shingle system. The wind couldn't penetrate the thick walls. Inside, she maintained a small fire for warmth. Not a large fire that would burn through resources, but a careful fire that gave just enough heat to keep her core temperature safe. She'd prepared for this storm not by checking weather reports, she had no access to those, but by reading the signs, the wind shift, the cloud patterns, the way animals behaved. Experience taught her to see the storm coming 2 days before it arrived. You've taught the other soldiers to hope it wouldn't. Let's pause again, because what's happening here isn't just about survival skills. It's about something deeper. Those young soldiers saw Vera's age and assumed decline, assumed weakness, assumed that 45 meant the end of capability. But they were confusing physical peak with functional competence. Yes, Vera couldn't run as fast as she could at 25. Yes, she needed more recovery time. Yes, her body had limitations it didn't have 20 years ago. But none of that mattered here. Because survival isn't a sprint. It's efficiency multiplied by knowledge multiplied by patience. And in those metrics, she was in her absolute prime. Every scar taught a lesson. Every failure taught a correction. Every year added to her database of what works and what kills you. The young soldiers were operating on theory. Vera was operating on scars. Day 5. The assessment was more than half over. 20 soldiers remained. Chen looked gaunt. His face was hollow, his movements slow. He'd learned a tremendous amount in 5 days, but had also burned through energy reserves that left him weakened. Moss was in similar condition. Others were worse. One soldier was walking with a pronounced limp from a twisted ankle he'd gotten on day 3. Several had visible infections from cuts that hadn't been cleaned properly. They were surviving, but barely. Extraction point was still miles away. 2 more days felt like an eternity. Vera had lost weight too. Everyone does when you're burning more calories than you're consuming. But she'd managed her energy carefully enough that she remained functional. Her knife skills, honed over decades, meant she could process materials with minimal effort. Her fire management meant she never wasted time restarting dead flames. Her navigation meant she never took wrong paths that cost precious energy. Every small efficiency compounded over 5 days into a significant advantage. She wasn't stronger than the young soldiers. She was smarter. And in survival, smart beats strong every single time. That evening, something extraordinary happened. Chen's group had been following a parallel path to Vera without realizing it. When they stumbled into a clearing and saw her camp, they stopped, stared. Her fire was substantial, well built. Her shelter was solid. She had fish smoking on an improvised rack. She looked competent, comfortable even within the context of survival conditions. Chen's pride wrestled with his desperation. Finally, desperation won. "Ma'am," he called out, keeping respectful distance. Would you mind if we asked you some questions?" Vera looked up, studied them. These young men who'd mocked her 5 days ago now stood before her, humbled by the forest, seeking knowledge. She could have turned them away, could have reminded them of their condescension, could have let them figure it out the hard way. But that wasn't who she was. "What do you need to know?" she asked. For the next hour, in violation of the assessment's non-assistance rules, but in accordance with something more important, the duty to teach, she showed them what they were doing wrong. Not everything, just enough. She demonstrated proper bow drill technique, explained the mechanics of trap placement, pointed out edible plants they'd been walking past for 5 days. She didn't coddle them, didn't do it for them, just corrected the critical errors that were costing them energy they couldn't afford to lose. Captain Rodriguez, watching on monitors, saw the teaching session. Hayes looked at her questioningly. "Do we disqualify her for assisting other candidates?" Rodriguez thought for a long moment, then shook her head. "No. We asked her to recertify as a survival instructor. She's instructing. That's not a violation. That's her job." Hayes smiled. "You realize what's happening, right? She's assessing them as much as we are. She's seeing who's teachable, who listens, who applies knowledge immediately." Rodriguez nodded. "The Phantom doesn't just survive. She teaches others to survive. That's why she's a legend." Day 6. The transformation in Chen's group was visible. They'd applied Vera's corrections. Their fire was better maintained. Their shelter, while still not perfect, was no longer actively fighting them. They'd caught 2 small fish using techniques she'd demonstrated. They were still exhausted, still hungry, but functional. More importantly, their attitude had shifted. The cocky confidence of day 1 was gone, replaced by humility. They'd learned the most important lesson survival teaches: respect the environment. Respect the knowledge. Respect those who know more than you. Other soldiers weren't as fortunate. 2 more triggered beacons on day 6. One from dehydration caused by drinking untreated water and getting severely sick. Another from exhaustion so complete they couldn't continue. The forest was taking its toll. Of the original 32, 15 remained. The extraction point was 6 miles away. One more night. One more day? For some, it felt like salvation was close. For others, it felt like they might not make it. Vera spent day 6 exactly as she'd spent the previous days. Maintaining systems, conserving energy, making incremental progress toward the extraction point without rushing. She could have moved faster, could have reached the extraction point a day early. But that wasn't the lesson. The lesson was sustainability. Any idiot can sprint until they collapse. The skilled survivor moves at a pace they can maintain until the job is done. She'd seen too many young soldiers burn themselves out trying to be heroes. Real heroes were the ones who crossed finish lines, not the ones who collapsed halfway there trying to look impressive. Day 7. Extraction Day. Soldiers began arriving at the designated point throughout the morning. Chin's group arrived just after 0900, exhausted but intact. Moss limped in around 1000, alone, his group having scattered. Others trickled in over the next hours. Each soldier who arrived looked like they'd been through war. Hollow eyes, dirty faces, torn clothing, but also something else. Pride. They'd done it. 7 days in the wilderness with almost nothing. They'd survived. Vera arrived at noon. She looked tired but composed. Her gear was organized. Her knife clean. She'd taken the time that morning to wash in a stream, not out of vanity, but out of discipline. She'd rebuilt her fire one last time and properly extinguished it before leaving. She'd scattered her shelter materials back into the forest. Leave no trace. That was the rule. Not just for environmental reasons, but because a good survivor is invisible. Chin saw her arrive and stood. His friends followed. They formed an informal reception line as she approached. "Ma'am," Chin said, extending his hand. "I owe you an apology." "We all do." Vera shook his hand. "You made assumptions. The forest corrected them. That's how learning works." "Who are you?" Moss asked. "I mean, we know your rank, but who are you really?" Before Vera could answer, Captain Rodriguez approached with the evaluators. "Congratulations to all of you who completed the assessment," Rodriguez announced to the gathered soldiers. "You've proven yourselves capable of surviving in adverse conditions with minimal resources. You should be proud." She paused, then looked directly at Vera. "But I want to take a moment to recognize someone specific. Master Sergeant Vera Ashford. Call sign, Phantom. Most of you didn't know, but Sergeant Ashford is the lead survival instructor for the entire Army survival program. She designed this assessment. She wrote the curriculum you studied. She's trained over 3,000 soldiers in survival techniques over the last 17 years. She has more certifications, more field experience, and more teaching hours than anyone in this program. And at 45 years old, she just completed her own assessment, not because she needed to prove anything to us, but because policy required it." The silence was profound. Chin looked like he'd been punched. Moss's face went through several expressions, landing somewhere between mortification and awe. Other soldiers stared, recalculating everything they'd assumed. Rodriguez continued. "Sergeant Ashford could have announced who she was on day 1. Could have pulled rank. Could have made this easy. She chose not to. She chose to complete this assessment on the same terms as everyone else. And in doing so, she taught you something more valuable than survival skills. She taught you not to judge based on appearance, not to assume age means inability, and not to mistake years for weakness when they actually represent mastery." Vera stood quietly, uncomfortable with the attention. This wasn't why she'd done it. She'd done it because the policy required recertification and she respected the rules. She'd done it because she wanted to stay current, to make sure her skills remained sharp. She'd done it because legends don't become legends by resting on past achievements. They become legends by proving themselves again and again in conditions that test whether the reputation is deserved. Rodriguez turned to her. "Sergeant, would you like to say anything?" Vera considered, then spoke, her voice carrying clearly across the exhausted group. "Age is going to happen to all of you. Your bodies will slow down. Your recovery will take longer. That's not a weakness. That's life. The question isn't whether you'll age. The question is what you'll build along the way. Skills compound. Knowledge accumulates. Experience teaches lessons that youth can't learn because it hasn't lived long enough to encounter them. I'm not stronger than I was at 25, but I'm better at survival now than I've ever been. Because survival isn't about strength. It's about intelligence, patience, and the wisdom to work with the environment instead of against it. Remember that. And the next time you see someone older than you attempting something difficult, don't assume they can't. Assume they might know something you don't." The soldiers absorbed this. Some nodded. Others looked at the ground, processing their assumptions and prejudices. Chin stepped forward again. "Thank you, Sergeant, for the lesson. All of the lessons. Vera nodded. You did well out there. Made mistakes, but learned from them. That's all any of us can do. She turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. Some of you helped each other out there. Shared knowledge. Worked together even though this was an individual assessment. That's the right instinct. In real survival situations, community and cooperation keep people alive. Don't lose that. Then she walked toward the transport vehicles, ready to return to base, ready to write her assessment reports, ready to teach the next group of soldiers who would probably also underestimate her until the forest taught them better. So what's the moral here? Maybe it's this. Age doesn't diminish capability in the ways we assume it does. Yes, physical peaks fade, but competence, wisdom, and expertise often grow. Vera at 45 was a better survival instructor than Vera at 25 could ever have been, not despite her age, but because of it. Every scar taught her what not to do. Every mistake taught her a better way. Every year added layers of knowledge that made her not weaker, but more complete. The young soldiers learned this lesson in 7 days. The rest of us might take longer. But the lesson remains. Don't confuse youth with capability. Don't mistake age for weakness. And never, ever underestimate someone just because they don't look like your idea of strength. Because sometimes, the strongest person in the forest is the one who's already survived 1,000 forests before this one. And that's why they call her Phantom. Not because she's invisible, but because by the time you realize what she's capable of, the lesson is already over and she's moved on to teach the next one. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran tales that honor the experience, wisdom, and enduring strength of those who serve across all ages and stages of life. And before you go, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And have you ever been underestimated because of your age, only to prove them wrong?